Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you a recipe for the East African chapati. This is a flatbread that you'll find in many East African countries like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and you can eat it on its own or with a cup of tea or with a nice curry, any kind of anything with a kind of sauce, and you just dip it in the sauce and eat it. It's just so yummy. As you can see, it falls apart like this, and it's got many layers, a little bit like puff pastry, but it's a little more substantial. This recipe actually requires no kneading, which is something that I discovered accidentally. I found that anytime I had leftover dough and I had left it in a bowl to sit, because I wasn't using it or I wasn't planning to use it, I realized that the longer you left it, the stretchier it got. And obviously the stretchier it gets, it means that the gluten is being released and the gluten strands are kind of forming. So then I just decided a few years ago that, you know what, I'm just going to be doing my dough like this. And it's worked out so far because, well, it's much easier. You don't need to work up a sweat. You don't need to feel like you've gone to the gym, or unless you want that kind of effect, which is fine. But if you don't want to have to work hard to have your chapati on your plate, then this is the way to do it, I think. Okay, so let's get started. So today I'm making very few chapatis. So I'm starting with one kind of mugful of plain flour. I use McDougall's flour, but you can use any flour that you want. So I start with 1 cup. This will make 4 chapatis, but normally I make more than that. And here you see me pouring in some salt. You need to put enough salt so that your chapatis aren't bland. You can get bland chapatis. I know it's just flour and water essentially, but you can get bland chapatis. Next, I'm going to put in some ghee. Other people do not use ghee. They just use oil, or if you want, you don't have to use ghee or oil. I find what this does is it makes the chapati a bit flaky, and I quite like that kind of texture. Actually, here I put a bit too much because I'm used to making a big batch. I kind of didn't think it over, but this is the amount of ghee that I would put if I wanted to make a bigger batch. But what I'm doing here is crumbling the ghee or salt, obviously, into the flour so that, you know, there aren't any big lumps of ghee left over. Once you've done that, you need to obviously get some water and pour it in slowly so that the flour and water is incorporated into a dough. So I'm not trying to knead here. I'm just trying to incorporate the water into the flour so that it becomes a dough. Okay, and once we've formed a dough, I'm just gonna roll it into a ball shape, and then put it in the bowl, and then cover it so that it doesn't dry out at the top, and cover it and leave it for about half an hour. Now, the amount of time you need to leave it for depends on the consistency of your dough. Now, as you can see, my dough here is the way I've made it. I would say I would have put a little bit less water if I had been more careful. So I left my dough for half an hour, but the longer you leave it, the stretchier it gets. And also, if it's too moist, then it will be hard to work with later on. That goes with even if you had kneaded the dough. That same concept goes whether you've kneaded the dough or not. So if the moisture content of your dough is a lot lower than mine, then you'd need to leave it in there for longer. If it's quite high, then maybe not as much. Basically, just make sure it isn't sticky at all, and also it shouldn't be a hard dough. So mine's ready after half an hour, and I'm just getting ready for the next step. So in the smaller bowl here, I've got just pure ghee, the one that I showed you earlier. That ghee actually is apparently it's a healthier version. I don't see how, but it's meant to be a healthier version, but you can use pure butter ghee. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the dough into 4 pieces. If you've never made chapati before, I would suggest following this recipe so that you know what kind of size it should be, because if you do use the measurements that I've used in this recipe, then you should get 4 balls of dough, and each ball will form 1 chapati. So then it makes sense that if you use 2 cups of flour, then it'll probably give you about 8 chapatis. Some people like them smaller, so you could probably stretch and get more. So I'm just, I like to arrange them in a line, so it's kind of like a queuing system here. Next, you get your rolling pin ready, and then flour the surface and get ready. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be creating the layers that we love to have in the chapatis. So roll up the dough, and you'll notice that if your dough is a good dough, it's rested enough, or if it's been kneaded enough, then the way you can tell if it's a good dough is the dough keeps stretching. It doesn't bounce back to the size it was originally when you let go with the rolling pin. And so as you can see, mine is just keep stretching and stretching and stretching. That's a little test for you actually. If you want to test if your dough is really good, just see how far it can stretch, and the further it can stretch, the better it is. And apart from that, I don't have to use a lot of strength to actually roll out the dough. With a really bad quality dough, you have to use quite a lot of strength to actually roll it out, and still it will just bounce back. So what you see me doing here is I've taken about a spoonful of ghee, and I've spread it, well, I'm spreading it everywhere evenly. If you want, you can use a little bit less ghee if you're really quite health conscious. And then once you've done that, you just split it with a spoon from the middle to the end, to the edge, and then just roll it like this. And while I'm rolling it, I am kind of trying to eliminate any air pockets that form inside, because it will be quite difficult to roll out the dough later. So once you reach almost to the edge, you lift it up, and then you wrap the rest of the remaining part around until you have a little piece left, and then you tuck it under like this. Make sure none of the ghee kind of surface is exposed, and then you obviously put the flour on the surface, and then just tuck the pointy end in with your fingers, and the first one is done. It takes a bit of practice, but that's the way my mum taught me. There's another way that my aunt taught me, and I'm going to show you that right now. So it's the same process at the beginning, rolling out the dough, and I stretch it as basically as thin as I can, and once I have got to the stage where I feel like, yeah, this is thin enough for me to be able to spread the ghee on without really kind of ripping it, I stop, and then I use the same amount of ghee. And with this process, I just find it's easier to spread with my hands. If you want, you can use a pastry brush, if you find that better for you. I'm just trying to keep it as real as possible and show you exactly how I do it in my kitchen. But normally what I do is I just, after I spread it, I just take like a tissue and I wipe my hand with that, and then I get on with the rest of the process. So after you've spread the ghee, you just lift up the rolled out dough like this, and that like kind of stretches it a little bit more. And once you feel like it's been stretched enough, like you can see mine is kind of suffering from being stretched. It's getting these rips everywhere, so I decided to stop, lay it flat, and then roll it like a sausage like this. And this is what's creating the layers. The fat is separating the dough from the next kind of layer, and so in the end, this is how we roll it. So you roll one side one way and the other side the other way, and then fold one side onto the other and put that away. Now there's another method that's very similar, but it's just a little bit easier for a beginner. And I'm just going to show you now. So roll out the dough like this, and then you don't have to lift it up, as I did last time. You can just roll it straight away like a sausage, and then stretch out the dough once it's been rolled like a sausage. So I'm going to do that right now. So this is how you would stretch the dough out even more. You can do it with your hands and roll it on the counter, or you can lift it up a little bit and tease it slightly. So it's time to cook our chapatis now. I use a non-stick pan like this, and I put it on the heat when I was rolling my last dough. And I've mixed the ghee with the oil in this bowl, and I always have my plate to the side ready to accept my cooked chapatis. And I'm also going to use this spatula. I don't know, I call that a spatula, but I'm not sure if it's actually called a spatula, so I might be wrong. Please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And so we're going to start with our first one. So we start with flouring the surface, and we do flour the surface to ensure that the chapati dough doesn't stick to the surface and make it difficult for you. Obviously, the more water content you have in your dough, the more sticky it will be, and the more flour you'll have to use. So today I think I've made my dough a little bit too moist, but really it's fine. But I'd prefer it to be a little bit less less moist than this, but it's still okay. It won't affect the softness of the chapati or the things that are desirable that we're looking from a chapati. Okay, so roll it out like this, and rolling it into a perfect circular shape, it does take practice. Even sometimes I don't get it right, but the more you practice and the more you'll get it right. So once you've rolled it out, you just lift it up and then slap it onto your pan like this. So this is how you slap it on, and then in a minute I will show you for the next chapati how you actually lift it up off the surface, because that's quite tricky for some people as well. So I've got my flame on a medium flame. Leave it there for a few minutes. I don't want to disturb it until I can see that it's actually starting to cook, and you'll see the color changing, the texture changing. And when it starts to change, that's when I'll take my spatula and I start spinning the chapati around, just to make sure that it's evenly heated throughout the surface. And when you see bubbles forming, this is a good sign, because it means that your layers are there and it's good. This is what we're looking for. It's not just a one-dimensional, one whole flat piece. So yeah, once you've seen the underside browning just a tiny bit, so it's going golden, you turn it over. And then once I leave that for a few minutes just to kind of cook slightly, I use a a kitchen towel, or I'm using a serviette to kind of apply tiny bit of pressure onto the chapati to spin it around, as you saw me do there, and that makes sure that the underside is evenly browned throughout. I'm saying browned, but it's not brown that you're looking for. You're looking for a golden color. So you leave it until the underside is becoming golden like this, slightly. So I then would push my chapati to one side to create space, and then add about 1 spoonful of ghee around the edge. Lift up the chapati as I did there, to allow the ghee to go underneath, and then I'll take my kitchen towel or serviette and spin it around like this. Now the hot ghee and oil mixture, that is what's going to make it crisp slightly, yeah, and create that lovely beautiful golden color. So once it is the kind of color that you like, you turn it over, sorry, and then from that point it doesn't take so long, because remember that side has already been really cooked from the first time you put the dough onto the pan. Yeah, so really what the objective of this is just to give it that slightly golden color like the top of the chapati has. Okay, it won't be the same underneath, it will be a different pattern, but nonetheless you want it slightly golden underneath as well. So now, as I said before, I'm going to show you how to lift the chapati off the floured surface. So take one hand and kind of like lift up one half of it into the other hand, and then you just do that. I mean, there's no explaining, there's just watching and doing. And also make sure that when you have put your chapati onto the pan, you kind of, if there's any corrections you need to make, like to make it sit nice and flat, then you do it quickly before it starts cooking, because you don't want to start pushing it with your fingers and stuff when it starts cooking, because you don't want the whole structure to kind of be ruined. So here I'm just going to go through the cooking process with you again. Can you see the nice beautiful bubbling on that chapati? That is such a beautiful one. I think that I'm going to eat that one because it just looks so good. So now I'm done making my full chapatis. I don't think I've ever made this few chapatis before, but yeah, so this is the end result. As you can see, when you rip it, all the layers just start falling apart, and that is what I love, you know. If you want it less flaky, obviously, as I said before, just put less ghee or don't put any ghee at all. I've never cooked chapatis with putting no ghee in my dough, but it's, you can see that, you know, it's not, they're not hard chapatis, they're wonderfully soft, they look just lovely from the top, and that's from applying that even pressure during the cooking process, and spinning the chapati around to make sure that the flame touches all of the, you know, surface of the chapati evenly. So that's the end of it, I guess. If you like my videos, like my channel, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe and press the bell button so that you can get notified of my next video. Also, don't forget to like and comment. I'd love to hear what you think of my content. Oh, actually, one thing I forgot to mention is I do love experimenting with different methods of, for example, making one particular dish, and I like knowing why changing one ingredient will kind of change the results, and what will it change and what will the effect be. So if you're interested in actually me showing you that experimentation process and finding out the results, if you want me to actually show you the results of, you know, what difference one ingredient or another would make on a dish, then please let me know, because I am planning to put out those kind of videos, but I'm not sure if you'd like them or not. But if you would like them, actually let me know, and also subscribe. And so yeah, before I start rambling on about that, because I love doing that kind of stuff, I'm just gonna say goodbye right now, and thank you so much for watching.